Arturo and Lee Di Filippo.
Arthur Schwartz or something like that.
Right, who changed his name, Arthur Schwartz. In those days, a lot of opera
Wait a minute, he
singers,
changed his name from Arthur Schwartz to Di Filippo?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
Wow.
loads of singers in those days would take Italian names in order to have careers. My very first opera production was a Don Giovanni that we did together in 1964
Well,
in Houston for the Houston Grand Opera.
one of the sopranos was a dear friend of mine from my days in Boston,
Named at this point,
Betty Hodges.
yeah, but she was named Louisa Doucette.
Betty Hodges doesn't sound like an opera singer.
She was Betty Hodges, renamed Louisa Doucette, and many people changed their names to Italianate names in order to have a career. I think ballet dancers frequently change names even nowadays to Russian-sounding names when they're just Jane Doe from wherever.
Alicia
From
Markova.
Kokomo, you know. Anyway, there was this company here doing kind of opera, but with no rehearsal. You know, one day of rehearsal. No new scenery, no new productions, minimal direction. There was, in those days, in the 40s and 50s, a company up north, and I lose their name.
Stevenello.
They had a warehouse full of soft sets. In other words, only soft drops, hanging drops. No sculptural anything, no props, furniture, no platforming, but they would rent to opera companies all up and down the East Coast, and maybe even as far as Cincinnati to the west. Stevenello would rent for a few dollars, plus the transportation in the back of a station wagon. They would rent a production of Carmen or a production of La Boheme, whatever.
It was so simple-minded that for dress rehearsal, he would tell the chorus, there's a cotton costumes, pick out something to wear.
Pick out something to wear, yeah. Hey, I mean, we joke about it now, but there was opera all over the country in these little opera companies that had no money. But they would hire in frequently a big star, one big star, and their whole budget would go to that star, and there'd be nothing left for production, rehearsal, nothing, you know. But that's the way it functioned. And that was kind of the birth of regional opera in this country. Now, here in Miami, which we have since made our home, New York was our home for many years, until we couldn't afford New York anymore. Now we've moved to the most expensive city in the United States, we find, in which to live 21 years later, most expensive city. This company functioned on that level for many long years. The Di Filippis may have elevated just a little bit in the 1960s to be a bit more, but not much.
Maybe in the 50s.
Maybe in the 50s.
Yeah. I've got to go back because Bob Herman, who had come from the Met, he had retired from the Met and had just really wanted to make a big fancy company down here.
Well, I thought you were going to take it back even further.
I am, just a minute.
Okay.
Anyway, we had been hired to do a very elaborate Tales of Hoffman by Seattle, which was Seattle, San Diego, Houston, Vancouver.
Big co-production. In the late 60s.
And Bob Herman, who was a colleague of mine, because he was the the manager at the Met while I was a manager in Washington.
In the late 50s.
And so we were, I won't say friends because I don't know if Bob had any friends. But anyway, he appreciated our Tales of Hoffman and wanted to do it at the Met.
I want to go back even earlier than that. I want to go back actually to 1970. You already knew Bob Herman because he was, as you say, he was Rudolph Bing's artistic administrator at the Met. You were the artistic director in Washington, D.C. You and I did our first Rake's Progress in Santa Fe in 1970.
Yeah.
If you'll remember. I remember very clearly being in Lauren Driscoll, the tenor's, your friend, Lauren, from the 50s, in his dressing room. He sang Tom Rakewell in the Rake's Progress. I remember being in his dressing room after the performance, and he introducing me. You were there, you already knew Bob Herman, but Lauren introduced me to Bob Herman, and that's the first time I ever met Bob Herman, who said, "Young man, I loved your design for the Rake's Progress. One day I hope to see you at the Metropolitan Opera." I shall never forget that. And at that point, and this is before the Tales of Hoffman. Wait a minute, no, I'm a little off. Because Bob Herman had also seen Tales of Hoffman in Seattle when we did it. That was a great production. And not only our production, but it was great in many ways because it had Joan Sutherland starring in it. She was the biggest star in the world. And that was 69.
And then we went down to San Diego and did it with Beverly Sills.
And we did it with Beverly Sills in San Diego. So Bob Herman was aware of who I was as a designer. He'd seen my Tales of Hoffman, our Tales of Hoffman, the year before in Seattle. And here I was, Rake's Progress, 1970, Santa Fe. The introduction was made by Lauren Driscoll. Lauren had been singing at the Met. He'd been singing in Meistersinger, the role of David. He knew Bob Herman very well, and he made this wonderful introduction. And Bob Herman said, "Young man, someday I hope to see you at the Met." And in fact, within the year, he spoke with Richard Bonning and Joan Sutherland, Richard, her husband, would they be interested in doing our Seattle production at the Metropolitan, except we would have a big budget to enlarge the production, to make it worthy of the Metropolitan Opera. And they agreed to it. They had loved the production. And so we were contacted by Bob Herman to come and make a presentation to Rudolph Bing of our production. But Bing was just in the transitional period when he was going to be leaving the Met. He was going to be out of the Met by the time our Tales of Hoffman would get to the stage. He was retiring. And as he was retiring, so were his administration. Bob Herman made the introduction, organized the whole thing for us to go to the Met, but he was leaving the Met. And lo and behold, although he said he was going to retire and just enjoy life and whatever, he took the position here as artistic director because the board of directors here in Miami felt that having Bob Herman here would elevate the whole company, because Bob Herman would bring all of the Met singers who were his friends and owed him favors because he had signed their contracts for so many years. He would bring all the directors that were the best directors at the Metropolitan Opera, and he would bring the designers, which is what he did. Bliss and I were the baby director and designer, but he brought wonderful people from La Scala, Nicola Benoit. He brought the really great American team of Nat Merrill and Bobby O'Hearn, who were veterans of the Metropolitan Opera, who had done all these great and wonderful productions. And we all came down here to the Dade County Auditorium to put on these rather extraordinary productions directed by Italians and Germans, and Gunther Schneider-Seensen, and Merrill. And
Bob asked us for the first year
he asked us, but we were already booked for someplace else. He asked us to do the Pearl Fishers that first year. So our first production was in Bob Herman's second year, and it was Thais. But with Bob Herman, this company bumped up enormously. First of all, he was doing 2 and 3 new productions a year with international designers. It doesn't exist now, and it existed really only in Bob Herman's day. After Bob Herman retired in 1986, for whatever reasons, it began to change. Not due to the desires of the company, but due to the changing economics of putting on opera and the vast fees that bringing big stars, the big stars. It radically hit the whole industry, not only in this city.
Not immediately for us.
Not immediately for us.
We still had big productions going and big stars.
Bob Hewer, who continued after Bob Herman, continued to hire us for major productions right up until not only the opening of the Arts Center with Aida, but the year after we did a beautiful, very expensive, very well-evolved production of La Traviata, and that was our last new production here. But along the way, we had done Turandot, Madame Butterfly, and oh, I can't remember, the Coronation of Popea, their first Baroque production ever here, working with major singers always. But since Bob Hewer has left this company, it's been in steady artistic decline, in that they don't do any new productions anymore, or rarely do. They bring in good productions, but sometimes, but that are generated by other companies. There's not the heyday of the Florida Grand Opera was Bob Herman to the really pinnacle, and then Bob Hewer sort of at a plateau, and then it sort of ended when Bob Hewer left the company.